My name is Alara, and when I was 19 years old, I was a prisoner in a place that called itself a school. It was there, in the cold halls of Graystone Academy, that I learned the true meaning of disgrace and the terrible price of virtue. I never imagined that a single desperate letter, smuggled out in the dead of night, would bring a scarred and broken war hero to our gates and unravel a conspiracy of unimaginable cruelty. It was a long shot, a prayer whispered into the wind, but it led to a confrontation that would not only save us all, but would also become the beginning of my entire life. Before I dive into how it all happened, and how the most reclusive man in the county became our unlikely savior, I'd love to know where you're all watching from today. Let me know in the comments down below. And if you've ever felt like your voice wasn't being heard, go ahead and hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new viewers, make sure you subscribe to join this incredible community of storytellers and survivors. The carriage ride to Graystone Academy felt like a funeral procession. My father sat opposite me, his face a mask of disappointed granite, while the bleak, wind-swept moors rolled past the window, a landscape as barren as my future. My crime had not been one of vice or rebellion, but of inconvenient principle. I had refused a marriage my father had arranged, a union with a man twice my age, whose cruelty to his staff was a town secret. For daring to have a will of my own, I was deemed a disgraced daughter, and Graystone was to be my penance. The school was a Gothic silhouette against a permanently bruised sky, a place where inconvenient daughters of the wealthy were sent to be polished, pruned, and made compliant, or, as I would soon learn, to disappear entirely. Its stone walls seemed to leach the warmth from the air, and its headmistress, Madame Gazelle Moreau, was the human embodiment of its chill. She was a woman of unnerving poise, her silver hair coiled in a perfect, severe chignon. Her smile never reached her eyes, which were the color of faded slate and missed nothing. Here at Graystone, she had said to me on that first day, her voice a silken threat, "We excise the flaws that have so disappointed your families. We mold you into young women of purpose and duty. You will learn obedience, Alara. It is the highest virtue a woman can possess." Life at Graystone was a regimen of crushing monotony, designed to sand away any sharp edges of personality. We had lessons in posture, in etiquette, in watercolor painting, and in 100 other useless arts intended to make us decorative and silent. We were ghosts in gray dresses, drifting through cold corridors, our names and pasts discouraged as topics of conversation. We were simply the disgraced. My only solace was Clara, a girl with wide, fearful eyes who had been sent away for the sin of loving a stable boy. We found a quiet kinship in the library, our whispered conversations a tiny rebellion against the enforced silence. It was Clara who first voiced the fear that had been coalescing in my own heart. "Have you noticed," she whispered one evening, her fingers tracing the spine of a book she wasn't reading, "how the girls who leave are always the quietest ones, the ones who've stopped fighting?" I had noticed every few months, Madame Moreau would announce at breakfast that a student had completed her refinement ahead of schedule and had been placed in an excellent position as a companion or governess to a noble family far away. There was never a farewell, never a letter back, just an empty bed and a chilling silence where a girl used to be. The latest to vanish was Sophie, a fragile girl who wept constantly for the first month, then fell into a state of vacant compliance. One morning, she was simply gone. Madame Moreau's announcement was clipped and dismissive, as if Sophie had been nothing more than a piece of furniture that had been removed. "Sophie has begun her new life," she'd said, her gaze sweeping over us, a testament to the transformative power of our methods. But it didn't feel like a transformation, it felt like an erasure. My suspicion began to fester, turning from a vague unease into a gnawing certainty. I started to watch, to listen. I took on extra cleaning duties, volunteering to dust the hallways near Madame Moreau's office, hoping to overhear something. The headmistress ran the school with a skeleton staff, preferring to use the students for most of the labor. It was a cost-saving measure, she claimed, that also taught us humility. I saw it as an opportunity. One afternoon, while polishing the heavy oak door to her study, I heard voices from within. Madame Moreau's tone was syrupy and false, the one she reserved for wealthy parents or potential clients. The other voice was that of Beatrice, a new arrival whose family's shipping fortune had been built on a foundation of ruthlessness that was apparently not inherited by their timid daughter. Beatrice was sobbing. "But I don't wish to be a governess in a foreign country," she pleaded, her voice thin and reedy. "I want to go home." Madame Moreau's voice dropped, losing its manufactured sweetness and gaining a razor's edge. "Your father has entrusted me with your future. He agrees that a clean break is for the best. I have found you a suitable match, Beatrice, a very wealthy, very influential man who is willing to overlook your delicate disposition. You should be grateful. A suitable match." The phrase echoed in the silent hallway, cold and heavy as a tombstone. It was the language of commerce, not employment. It was the language of a transaction. My blood ran cold. She wasn't finding them positions, she was selling them. I shared my horrifying conclusion with Clara that night. Our beds pushed close together in the drafty dormitory. Her face went pale in the moonlight, slanting through the barred window. "Sold," she breathed, her voice trembling. Like cattle?" The word hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. "She preys on the ones whose families want them gone," I whispered, the pieces clicking into place, "the ones who won't be missed, whose letters home, if they even write them, will be ignored. She breaks their spirit so they have no will to resist, then sells them off to the highest bidder." Clara began to cry, silent tears tracking paths down her cheeks. "What can we do? We're trapped here. No one will ever believe us." Her despair was a suffocating blanket, and for a moment I felt it smothering me too. We were disgraced daughters. Our families had cast us out. Our words meant nothing against a woman as respected and well-connected as Madame Moreau. But then I looked at Clara's terrified face, and I thought of Sophie's empty bed, and Beatrice's pleading voice, and a cold, hard anger began to burn away the fear. "Someone will believe us," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "We just have to find the right person." Our investigation became a silent, two-person conspiracy. Clara was my lookout, her natural timidity making her seem innocuous as she stood guard in the hallways, ready to signal me with a soft cough if anyone approached. I became a master of invisibility, using my cleaning rags and buckets as a passport into forbidden territories. I learned the schedules of the small staff, the exact moment the groundskeeper took his afternoon tea, the precious 15 minutes Madame Moreau spent inspecting the kitchens before dinner. Her study was the heart of the operation, the place where the truth must be hidden. Getting inside was impossible. She kept it locked at all times, the only key on a chain around her neck. But her waste paper basket was a potential treasure trove. Each evening, its contents were emptied into a larger bin behind the kitchens, destined for the incinerator. Under the cover of a moonless night, cloaked in oversized shawls that smelled of bleach, Clara and I would sneak out. While she watched the back door, I would plunge my hands into the day's refuse, a nauseating mix of vegetable peelings, old ledgers, and discarded papers. Most of it was useless, but then, one night, my fingers closed around a crumpled piece of thick, expensive stationery. I smoothed it out in the faint light from the kitchen window. It was a draft of a letter, written in Madame Moreau's elegant, looping script. It was full of crossed-out phrases and angry revisions, but the meaning was terrifyingly clear. It spoke of a ward who was fully prepared for her duties, and it mentioned a final installment of the dowry. It was addressed to a baron in a distant, bleak corner of the continent, a man known for his decadent tastes and his succession of young, short-lived wives. My stomach heaved. This wasn't just marriage, it was a potential death sentence. A few nights later, I found another prize, a small, torn corner of what looked like a ledger page. There were only 2 entries visible, but they were enough. One was a name, Sophie's, and next to it a sum of money that made me gasp. The other was a set of initials, BR, Beatrice's, with another, even larger sum beside it. It was cold, hard proof, but proof was useless if it stayed within these walls. We needed to get a message to the outside world, but to whom? The local magistrate was a frequent dinner guest of Madame Moreau's. He would laugh in our faces. Our parents had already washed their hands of us. We were utterly, completely alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I crept to the library, the one place in the school that felt like a sanctuary. The school was funded by a board of governors, wealthy patrons whose names were listed on a dusty plaque in the entrance hall. I had copied them down weeks ago. Most of them were just names. Society figures who likely never gave Graystone a second thought beyond signing a yearly check. I researched them in old society pages and directories, looking for a glimmer of hope. Lord Ashworth was ancient and frail. Lady Danbury was more interested in her prize-winning roses than in human affairs. Sir Reginald Pike was a close friend of Madame Moreau's family. It was hopeless. Then my eyes fell on the last name on the list, one I had almost dismissed, Lord Alistair Blackwood. His entry in the peerage guide was sparse. It listed his family seat, Blackwood Manor, an estate that bordered the moors not 10 miles from the school. It mentioned his distinguished military record, a string of commendations for bravery, and the fact that he had returned from the last war grievously injured. The society pages had nothing on him. He had lived as a complete recluse ever since his return. He never attended board meetings, communicating only through his solicitor. The other girls whispered stories about him, that he was horribly disfigured, a monster who hid from the world, a man who shuns the world, I thought. A man who has seen real conflict. Perhaps such a man would have little patience for the polite deceptions of society. Perhaps a man who had faced death would recognize the scent of it here. He was a long shot, a ghost, but he was the only one who wasn't enmeshed in Moreau's web. He was our only chance. Writing the letter was the hardest thing I had ever done. How do you scream for help in a voice that sounds sane and credible? I couldn't sound like a hysterical schoolgirl. I had to be factual, precise. I spent 3 nights writing and rewriting it by the faint light of a smuggled candle stub, the words swimming before my exhausted eyes. I described the disappearances. I quoted the phrase, suitable match. I mentioned the dowry. I detailed the ledger fragment. I named Sophie and Beatrice. I begged him, as a governor of the school and a man of honor, to investigate. I didn't sign my own name, fearing reprisal, but I signed it, a daughter of Graystone. Now came the most dangerous part, getting it out. The walls were high, the gates were locked. No one came or went without Madame Moreau's express permission, except for Tom. Tom was a lanky, quiet boy from the village, not much older than I was, who delivered groceries to the kitchen twice a week. He had a kind face and a perpetual sadness in his eyes. I had seen him once slip a bruised apple to one of the younger, weeping girls. I decided to trust him. I cornered him in the pantry, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pressed the letter and the few coins I had hidden in the seam of my mattress into his hand. "Please," I whispered, my voice shaking, "this is a matter of life and death. It must be posted in the village. No one can know." He looked from the letter to my desperate face. I could see the fear in his eyes. If he were caught, he would lose his job and his family depended on it. He would be ruined. He hesitated for a long moment, his Adam's apple bobbing. Then he gave a short, sharp nod, tucked the letter deep into his coat pocket, and walked away without a word. For the next 2 weeks, every footstep in the hall made me jump. Every time Madame Moreau's cold eyes rested on me, I was certain I had been discovered. Hope and terror waged a constant war in my chest. Nothing happened. The silence from the outside world was absolute. Clara grew more despondent, convinced the letter had never been sent, or had been ignored. I began to fear she was right. My one desperate prayer had vanished into the wind, and we were more alone than ever. Alistair Blackwood sat in the gloom of his library, a glass of amber liquid untouched on the table beside him. Rain lashed against the tall, arched windows of the manor, each drop a tiny hammer against his solitude. The letter had arrived 3 days ago, delivered with the regular post. The envelope was cheap, the address written in a neat, controlled hand that seemed at odds with the frantic urgency of the words within. He had read it once, then twice, and a third time. His first instinct was to dismiss it. He was a governor of Graystone in name only, a duty inherited with the title, a charity his father had supported. He pictured a boarding school full of dramatic, overprivileged girls, prone to flights of fancy. A suitable match could mean anything. A dowry could be a misunderstanding. But the letter refused to be dismissed. There was a precision to the details, a chilling lack of hysteria. The author had named names. Sophie, Beatrice. It spoke of a ledger. It was the plea of a logical, terrified mind, and it had slipped past the formidable defenses he had built around himself since the war. The war had left him with more than just the network of scars that pulled at the skin on the left side of his face and neck. It had left him with a deep, abiding hatred of bullies, of those who used power to crush the helpless. He had heard pleas like this before, whispered in shelled-out buildings and field hospitals, the last hopes of people with nothing left. He had not been able to help them all, and the ghosts of those he had failed were his constant companions in this self-imposed exile. He ran a hand over his scarred face, the familiar gesture a comfort and a curse. The world saw a monster, a recluse. He had let them. It was easier than seeing the pity in their eyes. But the girl who wrote this letter wasn't asking for pity. She was asking for a soldier. A cage, however gilded, is still a cage, she had written in the final line. The phrase snagged in his mind. It was elegant. It was desperate. He stood up, the decision made. He would go to the school. He would conduct his long-overdue governor's inspection. He would see this cage for himself. His arrival at Graystone Academy was an earthquake. He didn't send word, he simply appeared, his black carriage pulling up the long gravel drive on a Tuesday morning, a time of rigidly scheduled botany lessons. The sight of the carriage, of the imposing figure that emerged from it, sent a ripple of shock through the entire school. Lord Alistair Blackwood, the phantom governor, was real. And he was here. He was taller than I had imagined, with a soldier's bearing that no injury could erase. He moved with a stiff grace, leaning lightly on a silver-headed cane. The left side of his face was a tapestry of old wounds, the skin tight and ridged, pulling one eye slightly wider than the other, giving him an expression of perpetual, startling intensity. He was not a monster. He was a man who had survived something terrible. Madame Moreau was, for the first time since I had met her, visibly flustered, but her recovery was swift. She glided out to meet him, her face a mask of delighted surprise. "Lord Blackwood, what an unexpected honor. Had we known you were coming, we would have prepared a proper welcome." Her voice was pure honey. An inspection is more effective when it is unexpected. "Madame Moreau," he replied, his voice a low rumble, devoid of warmth. "I trust you have nothing to hide." His gaze swept past her, over the manicured lawns and the gray stone facade, and for a fleeting second, it felt as though he were looking for someone. For me. The tour of the school was a masterclass in deception. Madame Moreau was magnificent. She presented a flawless institution of learning and refinement. The classrooms were spotless. The girls were models of polite deference, their heads bowed, their voices soft. She showed him the art studio, the music room, the pristine dormitory. She spoke of her dedication to these unfortunate girls, of her mission to restore them to their families as virtuous and accomplished young women. Alistair listened patiently, his face unreadable. He asked few questions, but his eyes were constantly moving, taking in the bars on the dormitory windows, the high walls surrounding the property, the anxious, downcast eyes of the students. He saw everything she tried to conceal, the pervasive atmosphere of fear. He felt it like a change in air pressure. This was not a school, it was a prison. Finally, in the grand hall, he stopped before the portraits of the graduating students. "I should like to speak with a few of the girls," he said, his tone casual, "to get a sense of their experience here." Madame Moreau's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, I can recommend several of our most promising students. Amelia has a wonderful gift for the pianoforte, and Charlotte is—" "I prefer to choose at random," he interrupted smoothly. He requested the student roster, My heart hammered in my chest as he ran a gloved finger down the list of names. Please, I prayed, please find me. His finger stopped. Alara, he read aloud. I will speak with Alara. The interview took place in the library, the only room in the school with any warmth. Madame Moreau insisted on being present, positioning herself in a high-backed chair by the fireplace, a silent, menacing chaperone. I sat opposite Lord Blackwood, my hands clasped in my lap to keep them from shaking. He looked at me, and his intense, mismatched eyes held no pity, only a quiet, assessing focus. He started with innocuous questions. How were my studies? Did I enjoy the grounds? Was the food adequate? I gave the polite, rehearsed answers that were expected of us. All the while, I could feel Madame Moreau's stare, sharp and possessive. I risked a glance at her. Her expression was one of smug satisfaction. She thought he was being fooled. She thought I was a broken, compliant little doll. Then, Lord Blackwood leaned forward slightly. The school's charter speaks of preparing young women for a life of purpose, he said, his voice dropping a little. But one must be wary. A cage, however gilded, is still a cage, he said it. The final line from my letter. It was a signal, a confirmation. He had received it. He believed me. A dizzying wave of hope and terror washed over me. I had to hold on, to play my part. I met his gaze and held it for a beat too long, letting him see the truth in my eyes before I lowered them demurely to my lap. Yes, my lord, I said softly. One must be very wary indeed. It was enough. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Understanding, confirmation. But Madame Moreau saw it too. The charged silence, the non-verbal exchange. Her eyes narrowed. The interview ended shortly after, but the damage was done. From that moment on, I was marked. The headmistress's retaliation was swift and cruel. I was removed from my library and cleaning duties and assigned to the scullery, a place of endless, back-breaking work in hot, greasy water. My friendship with Clara was forbidden. We were seated on opposite sides of the dining hall and assigned to different dormitories. I was being isolated, worn down. Moreau would appear silently while I was scrubbing pots, her presence a cold weight on the back of my neck. Lord Blackwood is a sentimental man, she hissed one afternoon, her voice a venomous whisper in my ear. He has a misplaced sympathy for wounded things. Do not mistake it for a genuine interest in you, little girl. You are a disgrace, and you will do well to remember it. But her threats no longer had the same power. Hope had taken root. He knew. He was here. I just had to survive until he could act. Another girl, a senior student named Isabel, who had long since given up any hope of leaving, pulled me aside in the laundry room one day. Her eyes were dull, her shoulders slumped in permanent defeat. Be careful, she whispered, not looking at me as she folded sheets. She's watching you. I've seen her ruin girls for less than a look. Whatever you're planning, stop. You can't win against her. No one can. Her words were meant as a warning, but they solidified my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Isabel, and Sophie, and all the others who had lost the will to even try. 2 nights later, a message found me. A loose stone in the scullery wall. A place Tom the grocery boy could access from the outside. Tucked inside was a folded note. Library, midnight, come alone. The handwriting was bold and masculine. Alistair, getting there was a risk. The halls were patrolled by a grim-faced matron, but I slipped out, my stockinged feet silent on the cold stone floors, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The library was dark, lit only by a sliver of moonlight. He was waiting by the shelves, a tall shadow among other shadows. You came, he said, his voice a low murmur. I was a fool to doubt you. You were brave to write, he countered, braver than you know. Tell me everything. In hushed, urgent tones, I told him all of it. The overheard conversations, the ledger fragments, my fears for Beatrice and the other girls, who seemed to be fading into compliance. He listened without interruption, his scarred face impassive in the dim light, but I could feel the coiled stillness in him, the focused intensity of a predator. The ledger you mentioned, he said, when I had finished. The full one. It would likely be in her study. She keeps it locked always. The key is on her person. He nodded slowly, his mind clearly working. I will need undeniable proof to bring the authorities. Her word against a disgraced girl's is not enough. The local magistrate is in her pocket. I will need to bring someone from the capital, but I need the book, Alara. Before we could plan further, we heard the telltale jingle of the matron's keys in the distant hall. Go, he whispered. I will find a way to get you into that office. Be ready. I slipped away, back to my cold bed, but not to sleep. A plan was in motion, a lord and a disgraced daughter, allied against the darkness. For the first time, the fight felt winnable. The axe fell 2 days later. Madame Moreau made the announcement at breakfast, a triumphant glint in her slate-gray eyes that was aimed directly at me. Girls, I have wonderful news. A highly respectable and very wealthy widower from the continent has been seeking a suitable companion. After careful consideration, I have determined that our dear Clara is the perfect match. She is a testament to our school's ability to reform even the most misguided girl. She will be leaving to begin her new life in 2 days' time. A collective gasp went through the room. Clara's face crumpled, all color draining from it. She looked at me across the hall, her eyes wide with sheer terror, a silent scream for help. Moreau was not just selling Clara, she was punishing me. She was showing me that my attempts to fight were futile, that she could pluck my friends away one by one while I stood by, helpless. The unspoken threat was clear. You are next. The news sent a shockwave of panic through me. 2 days. We had only 2 days to save her. I had to get a message to Alistair. That afternoon, I feigned a sudden illness in the scullery, a dizzy spell that sent me collapsing to the floor. The matron, annoyed but obligated, helped me to the infirmary, a small cold room that thankfully had a window overlooking the delivery yard. I waited until the matron left, then scribbled a frantic note on a scrap of bandage wrapping with a piece of charcoal from the hearth. Clara, 2 days, we are out of time. I wrapped it around a small stone, and when I saw Tom's cart rattling into the yard, I tossed it out the window. It landed silently in a sack of potatoes. I could only pray he would find it. That night, the message came back through the loose stone in the scullery wall. Tomorrow night, I will create a diversion at 9 o'clock. She will be occupied. You will have a window. Get the ledger. The note wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Tomorrow, everything hinged on tomorrow night. The day was the longest of my life. I went through the motions, scrubbing and cleaning, my mind a whirlwind of fear and planning. Every time I saw Clara, her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. She was being fitted for a traveling dress, a beautiful silk gown that looked like a shroud. The other girls avoided her, as if her fate were contagious. They avoided me too. They knew I was somehow at the center of this, that my silent rebellion had brought this doom upon my friend. Their fear was a tangible thing, another wall closing in. At exactly 5 minutes to 9, the main bell of the academy began to toll, a frantic, chaotic sound that was only ever used for fires. Shouts echoed from the main hall. Girls poured out of their rooms, panicked and confused. Matrons ran through the halls, trying to impose order. This was it. This was Alistair's diversion. Amid the chaos, I slipped away, moving against the tide of frightened students, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I made my way toward the west wing, toward Madame Moreau's study. The hallway was blessedly empty. I could hear Alistair's voice, booming from the direction of the foyer, laced with command and fury. He was berating the head groundskeeper, accusing him of negligence, claiming to have seen smoke near the stables. It was a brilliant performance. I reached the study door. My hands trembled as I pulled a thin piece of wire from the cuff of my dress, something I had stolen from the mending room weeks ago. I had practiced on old locks in the attic, but this one was different. It was newer, more complex. I inserted the wire, my breath held tight in my chest. I felt for the tumblers, sweat beading on my forehead. The sounds of the commotion seemed to be fading. My window of opportunity was closing. Click. The lock gave way. I slipped inside, closing the door silently behind me. The room was just as I remembered it from my cleaning days. Opulent, organized, and cold. Her large mahogany desk dominated the space. The ledger had to be here. I went to the desk first, pulling open the drawers. They were filled with files on each student, household accounts, correspondence, but not the book I was looking for. I checked the bookshelves, running my hands along the spines. Nothing. My panic began to rise. Where would she hide something so incriminating? I thought about her character: meticulous, paranoid, arrogant. She would want it close. I scanned the room again, my eyes snagging on a small, ornate Persian rug beneath the desk. It seemed slightly askew. I dropped to my knees and pulled it back. A section of the floorboards looked different, the seams newer, cleaner. I pried at it with my fingernails. It lifted, revealing a small hidden compartment, and there it was, a thick, leather-bound volume. I pulled it out, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I opened it, page after page of names, dates, and figures, all in Moreau's perfect script. Sophie, Beatrice, and near the end, Clara's name, with a recent date and the largest sum yet. A new entry had been added at the very bottom of the page, my own name, Alara. The space for the sum was still blank. A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't heard the commotion die down completely. Had someone come to investigate? I shoved the ledger into the bodice of my dress, a cold, hard weight against my skin, and scrambled for a hiding place. The heavy velvet curtains pooled on the floor beside the window. I dove behind them just as the doorknob began to turn. The door opened and Madame Moreau stepped inside, followed by Lord Blackwood. My heart stopped. It was a trap. He had led her here. "As you can see, my lord," Moreau was saying, her voice tight with irritation, "there is no fire. Your man was mistaken. You have caused a considerable and unnecessary panic. One can never be too careful with the safety of one's wards," Alistair replied, his voice calm. He walked further into the room, his cane tapping softly on the floorboards. His eyes scanned the room, and for a terrifying second, they seemed to linger on the curtains where I was hiding. "I apologize for the disturbance. However, since we are here, there is another matter I wish to discuss." He turned to face her fully. His casual demeanor had vanished, replaced by the unyielding authority of a commanding officer. "I have reason to believe you are engaged in criminal activity, madam, specifically the trafficking of your students." Moreau laughed, a short, ugly sound. "That is a preposterous accusation, Lord Blackwood. You have been listening to the fanciful tales of a troubled girl, haven't you? Alara, she's a known liar, sent here for her delusions. I have her father's letters to prove it." "I am not interested in her father's letters," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "I am interested in your financial records, specifically a private ledger where you document the sale of your students into forced marriages." Moreau's face went white, but she held her ground. "You are insane. There is no such book. Search the room, if you must. You will find nothing. You have no proof." This was my cue. This was the moment. My fear was a physical thing, a cold hand squeezing my lungs, but the thought of Clara, of my own name at the bottom of that list, propelled me forward. I stepped out from behind the curtain. Madame Moreau spun around, her eyes widening in shock, and then narrowing into slits of pure hatred. "You," she spat. I didn't look at her. I looked at Alistair, pulling the heavy ledger from my dress. My hands were steady now. "I believe this is the proof you require, my lord." I held it out to him. He took it, his eyes meeting mine with a look of fierce, profound pride. He opened the book and placed it on the desk, turning it for Moreau to see. She stared at the open page, at her own meticulous handwriting betraying her, and for the first time her perfect composure shattered completely. "This is a forgery," she stammered, her voice cracking. She planted it. The little witch. The study door opened again. But this time, it was not a matron, it was two uniformed constables, led by a stern-faced man I didn't recognize, the magistrate from the capital, the one Alistair had summoned. "Giselle Moreau," the magistrate said, his voice ringing with authority, "you are under arrest for the selling of minors, fraud and unlawful imprisonment." Moreau stared at him, then at Alistair, then at me. The hatred in her eyes was so potent it was almost tangible. "You will regret this," she whispered to me, as the constables took her arms. "You will always be nothing but a disgraced little girl." But as they led her away, as I stood there with the weight of the world lifting from my shoulders, I didn't feel like a disgraced girl. I felt like the soldier who had just won the war. The immediate aftermath was a storm of controlled chaos. The capital magistrate and his constables were efficient, securing Madame Moreau's office and beginning the methodical process of interviewing every student and staff member. The academy, once a place of oppressive silence, was now filled with the sounds of weeping, of urgent questions, of the rustle of official papers. The girls huddled together in the grand hall, their faces a mixture of shock, terror, and a dawning incredulous relief. Clara found me, throwing her arms around me and sobbing uncontrollably, her tears soaking the shoulder of my drab gray dress. "You saved me," she wept over and over. I thought I was going to die." I held her tightly, murmuring reassurances, but my eyes were scanning the hall for Alistair. I saw him near the main entrance, speaking in low, decisive tones to the magistrate. He moved with a purpose and authority that seemed to calm the very air around him. He was no longer a recluse hiding from the world. He was a commander in his element, taking control of a battlefield. He had brought order to the chaos he had helped unleash. Some of the staff, those who had been complicit through their silence or active participation, were being questioned separately. The grim-faced matron who patrolled the halls at night looked pale and shaken, her usual arrogance gone. The groundskeeper, who kept the gates locked so securely, refused to meet anyone's eyes. The web of complicity had been intricate, and now it was being unraveled, thread by painful thread. Later, when a fragile quiet had finally settled over the school, I found myself standing alone by one of the tall windows in the library, looking out at the dark moors. The bars on the window no longer seemed like a cage, but simply a pattern against the glass. I was so lost in thought that I didn't hear him approach until he was standing beside me. "A quiet place in the middle of a storm," Alistair said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. I turned to look at him. In the dim light, the scars on his face were just shadows, the intensity in his eyes replaced by a deep, weary gentleness. "Is it over?" I asked, the words barely a whisper. "For Moreau, yes," he confirmed. "The ledger is undeniable. The testimony of the other girls corroborates everything. She will not see the outside of a prison for a very long time. As for the school, that is a more complicated question." We stood in silence for a moment, the shared danger and triumph creating a bond between us that needed no words. "Your letter," he said finally, turning to face me more fully. "When I received it, I was not in a good place. I had convinced myself that the world outside my own walls was not my concern, that I had done my part. You reminded me that duty does not end just because a war is over." "And you," I replied, finding a courage I didn't know I possessed. "You reminded me that there are honorable people in the world." I was beginning to believe they were just a story in books. He gave a small, sad smile. "They are rarer than the books would have you believe, which makes the courage of people like you all the more vital." He looked at me, his gaze searching. "What she said to you, that you would always be nothing. She is wrong. You have more honor and strength than any person I have ever met, Alara." His words were a balm on wounds I hadn't even realized were still raw. My father's disappointment, Moreau's cruelty, they had all tried to define me by my supposed disgrace. But Alistair saw me, the real me. "What will you do now?" he asked gently. "Your family," he left the sentence unfinished. But I understood. My family had sent me here to be rid of me. They would not welcome their defiant daughter back. "I don't know," I confessed, the uncertainty of my future a vast empty space before me. "I suppose I am free, but I have nowhere to go." "That is not true," he said, his voice firm. "You will not be abandoned or forgotten again. I will see to it. You have my word." In that moment, looking at the scarred war hero who had answered my desperate plea, I knew my life had irrevocably changed. The doors of Graystone Academy would soon open, but the path beyond them was no longer a terrifying void. It was a beginning. 6 months passed. The winter snows melted from the moors, replaced by the stubborn green of spring. Graystone Academy was closed, a silent stone monument to the horrors that had transpired within its walls. The scandal had been immense, shaking the highest levels of society. The story of the Graystone brides, as the newspapers called us, was on everyone's lips. Thanks to Alistair's influence and meticulous work, every girl had been accounted for. Clara had been joyfully reunited with her family, who, horrified by what their daughter had endured, had even consented to her marrying her beloved stable boy. Others, whose families were less welcoming, were given generous funds from a trust Alistair established to start new, independent lives. And I had found a new, quiet life in the one place I never expected, Blackwood Manor. Alistair had offered me a position as his archivist, tasked with sorting and cataloging the centuries of books and papers that filled his magnificent, neglected library. He had framed it as a job, a way for me to earn my keep until I decided on my future, but we both knew it was something more. It was a sanctuary. The work was a balm to my soul. The quiet, dusty rooms, filled with the stories of ages, were the perfect antidote to the years of enforced silence and fear. I found a rhythm in the methodical work, a peace in bringing order to the chaos of the past. It was healing for both of us. As I organized his family's history, he began to slowly, carefully unpack his own. He spoke of the war, not of the battles or the glory, but of the quiet moments of loss, the weight of command, the guilt of survival. I, in turn, told him about my life before Graystone, of my love for learning that my father had deemed unladylike, of my quiet defiance that had been labeled disgrace. In the sanctuary of the library, we were not Lord Blackwood, the reclusive hero, and Alara, the rescued schoolgirl. We were simply Alistair and Alara, two survivors finding their way back into the light. The physical scars on his face became invisible to me, eclipsed by the kindness in his eyes and the dry wit that emerged more and more frequently. And he, in turn, never saw me as a victim, but as the brave strategist who had orchestrated the downfall of a tyrant. One afternoon, as we worked together on a particularly tangled collection of 18th century correspondence, he paused, a thoughtful expression on his face. "The Board of Governors has been reconstituted," he said. "They have decided to reopen Graystone, but with an entirely new name and a new mission. It will be a proper place of education for young women, a place that empowers them rather than breaks them." "That's wonderful news," I said sincerely. "They are looking for someone to help design the new curriculum," he continued, his gaze steady on mine. "Someone who understands, from personal experience, what is needed. Someone with intelligence, integrity, and a profound sense of justice." They asked me for a recommendation. I gave them your name. I stared at him, speechless. Me, a disgraced daughter, now being asked to shape the very institution that had been my prison? It was an impossible, wonderful thought. "I don't know what to say, Alistair. Say you'll consider it," he said, a rare, full smile gracing his lips and transforming his scarred face. "You once told me you didn't know where you were going. It seems to me, Elara, that you can go anywhere you wish, and more importantly, you can build the path for others to follow." Looking at him then, in the warm afternoon light, filtering through the library windows, surrounded by books and the quiet hum of a life rebuilt, I felt a sense of peace and purpose that I had never imagined possible. The world had tried to put me in a cage, but a man who had been trapped in his own had shown me how to find the key. My past as a disgraced daughter was not an ending, it was the beginning of my strength. Looking back now, it's strange to think how one small act of courage, writing a letter in the dark, could unravel so many lives and build new ones from the wreckage. It taught me that your circumstances don't have to define your character, and that sometimes the very things the world sees as your weaknesses, your principles, your defiance, your refusal to break, are actually your greatest strengths. Speaking up when you're terrified is one of the hardest things in the world, but your voice is more powerful than you could ever know. I would love to hear from you all in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to speak up, even when it was scary? Share your story. because every story shared gives courage to someone else who needs to hear it. And please, don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories of survival and empowerment. Thank you so much for joining me today and for listening to my journey. Remember that the label the world gives you is never as important as the one you give yourself. I wish you all strength and courage on your own paths.